The topic tonight is a difficult one because it's about trying to cover. You can't cover all the angles in 12 talks, but you can cover some of them. And this is one which raises rather interesting and perhaps disturbing, I don't know, complicated issues when we consider Israel in the years 49 to 52. And that has to do not with Israel and the Arabs, but Israel and its Arabs, which is something quite different. The fundamental problem, as far as Israel is concerned, a basic problem, is that when the state of Israel is founded, there's a large and a hostile Arab minority. Okay? I don't have my laser pointer. Has everybody got a laser pointer by any chance in the audience? They would save me some trouble. Otherwise, I'll have to do like the Wizard of Oz or something and just point that way. But as you can see in the map, this is Israel in 1949 as the final borders after the 49 war. Oh, hooray! Here's a hero.
First clap, second was a flashlight.
Thanks very much. Great, that's it. Oh, hooray! Thank you very much. Okay. No, we have our audience. There's no questions. Yeah. That was seriously, right over here is the majority. Right over here, where Israel takes over in the 48 war, and what they call the War of Independence, right over here, was a large majority of Arab places that were not expelled. Now, for a variety of reasons, including the city of Nazareth, which is right up there, and all along the border here. See what I'm doing with this crazy borders I keep criticizing during this series? One of the reasons I keep doing that. Very good. Well, it's the best we can do. He says I'm telling you, a Jewish audience is unbelievable. Do you want some mayo with the sandwich? But all along those areas are heavy Arab population. That's the point. Israel basically came to being in the war in 48, of course, and in the course of the war, there were all kinds of military operations. And one of the things that happens is that the Tzahal is able to go on the offensive and take over large areas, particularly in the middle and the later part of 48, which was heavily occupied by Arabs, particularly, for example, the Western Galilee, the part of Galilee near Haifa, in other words, in those kind of areas. And this was a matter of military conquest, and it did not take place in the context of what we spoke about last year, the first phase of the Arab-Israeli War of 47, 48, 49. In the very first phase, when the Israelis came into places, the Arabs either fled or were kicked out. And on a few occasions, this happened in the fighting in the middle of 48. For example, the cities of Ramla and Lud is very famous, or infamous, depending how you look at it. On the other hand, in the north, the Haganah and the Israeli army, when they occupied such areas as Akko, and particularly Nazareth, which was an all-Arab city and a major headquarters there's zero Jews, and similar areas. These were parts that had hoped to be under the Mufti, but obviously he lost. And it was clear by June, July, August, September of 48 that the Israelis are on a winning streak. And when this happens, as you'll see in a second, let's run it as I talk, right? This is yeah, that's right. Here is the Israeli army coming into Nazareth. And you see, it's a military occupation force. That's what it is. The tanks and the armored things. And the Arabs were simply scared to death, and they surrendered. And this happened over and over again throughout villages and towns. I mean, here's a guy in the loudspeaker speaking in Arabic, which is, be calm, don't make any trouble, and everything will be okay, and words to that effect. There were other towns in which the loudspeaker went, get out of here and run away and go to Abdullah or something like this. But there are many towns where they did not. That's right. I tried to emphasize last year, and I reiterate tonight, Israel had an inconsistent policy, meaning the lack of a policy on this in the 48 war. And so in some places they forced them out, and in some places they simply did not. I can tell you right now that Moshe Carmel was the Israeli commander in the Galilee war in 48, a very good general actually, one of the best. And when he, in the second part of the war, when he marched towards Nazareth, which again is an all-Arab town, the Arabs basically came out to him and said, okay, you win, do you want us to leave? If you do, then we'll leave. And he said, no, no, you can stay. So it's interesting. If he would have been of a different disposition, he would say, oh, then all the Arabs would leave Nazareth. It's quite remarkable. It would be an all-Jewish town today instead of a town of close to 1 million Arabs. But whatever the case is, these kind of situations happen over and over again. And, you see what it says over there. You're not allowed to, Knesah Surah Makom Kadosh, don't go into a mosque, don't go into a church. Because in that town, particularly, since it's Nazareth, the whole eyes of the world were looking, and Ben Gurion and the others were super scared they shouldn't make any kind of desecration of a holy place. Now, a lot of it happened anyway because that's what happens in wars. I can tell you that right now. There are a lot of places, mosques, churches, monasteries, and things like this, which were desecrated or hurt in the 48 war. On the other hand, when the war was over, Israel did make a good faith effort to try to repair it. They really did. And they kind of did. So much so that the guy in charge of this operation, which was Yaakov Herzog, the son of Chief Rabbi Herzog, who was an important official in the government, a young fellow, he was in his late 20s, he was able to secure from Catholics and other bishops and people like that letters of testimony that Israel did make a good faith effort to try to repair the damage that was done. But don't fool yourself in a minute that everything was nice and easy in a war, because it never is. Right? We certainly know that's not the case in the American army. That's not the case in the Israeli army either. The bottom line is that, let's go to the next one. Here, of course, is the partition map of 48. You see how small Israel was supposed to be, right? This is the part. This color is the part that was supposed to be Israel. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. You guys can see better than I can. I'm at the wrong angle here, but this all here was Israel, much smaller than Israel emerged. And therefore, when Israel was originally partitioned by the United Nations in November 47, it was planned that there would be 650,000 Jews and 450,000 Arabs in the Jewish state. As I mentioned last week, if the Arabs would have been smart from their own cynical point of view, they said, we take the deal, you know and I know, if they had 450,000 and 650 Arabs and 650,000 Jews, even if the Israelis would bring in another 650,000 refugees, it wouldn't take that long for the Arabs to catch up with and outnumber the Jews. But they, emotionally, they could not see it that way. And so the bottom line is that by the time the fighting is over and the armistices are signed and Israel acquired whatever territory it acquired, particularly at the very end, if you remember last time, they got a little bit of extra land from King Abdullah in order to make a deal with him. That land was full of Arab villages and towns, so you end up with 155,000 Arabs. Okay? So it's 650,000 Jews and 155,000 Arabs. Wait, hold it. If you followed last week's talk, so thanks to these guys, let's go to the next one. Thanks to Truman and Atchison, they pressed them to take in another 100,000. They didn't take in 100,000, but they did take in 32,000. What they call family reunification. This did happen. I'm not finished. In addition to that, I spoke about the Mistananim, about the infiltrators, meaning Arabs who just simply said, I'm going back to where I used to live. And Israel can't control that long border, especially in 48, 49, 50, 51. They don't have an army to do that. And nobody besides China has an army that can man that whole area. And so, now I'm saying the borders are done in such a crazy way. So 20,000 Arabs just sneak back in, and Israel's not able to control it. And they just simply say, it's like the United States is doing with the Mexicans. They call undocumented aliens, and the bottom line is the political system accepts them and legitimizes them. And this is really what happened in Israel. So, in other words, between 155,000 and another 50,000, you're talking about 200,000 Lamaisa, right? You're talking about 200,000 population of the Arabs. And how big is the Jewish population? As we saw, they kind of doubled it. So they went from 650,000 to 1.3 million, approximately 1.2 million. And so it's definitely true that the Jews strongly outnumber the Arabs, but the Arabs is not a small minority either, correct? 200,000 to start out with is not a tiny group. And therefore, when you look at the Israeli map over here, it's a little bit complex because particularly, I say, if there's 200,000 Arabs, there's a heavy, I'm trying my best here, there's a heavy concentration of them right there in the Galilee. And I hate to say this, but at this moment, in the year 2012, a decisive majority of the population of the Galilee is Arab. I can tell you right now, you don't have to be a brilliant prognosticator. This is the Arab plan. First, get a Palestinian state in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, and get that recognized in the United Nations, which we saw this week is easier than people imagined. And then after you get that, then the next thing you do is you have an independence movement for the Galil. And it's based on the idea that you have a certain apartheid because a minority is oppressing a majority. And whose side is the United States and these other countries going to be on? You know the answer to that. The only thing Israel can do, it's sad that I'm speaking this way, the only thing Israel can do is try to nail down in some kind of a peace treaty that, you can't take away the Galilee from us. But I'll tell you right now, I know the Arabs, they will not agree to that. They'll wiggle out of it somehow or other. And so the argument is not going to be over the West Bank, as some of us, try to persuade ourselves. The argument is going to be over areas like Nazareth and others, which are in the heart of Israel, and was wird sein, and it's not a pretty picture. So anyway, let's go back to 48. These Arabs live in villages and small towns for the most part. They were conquered by the Israeli army in the war. Obviously, they weren't happy at being occupied. Right? That's not the way they planned it. They all planned that the Mufti will win, or perhaps the Arab states in their invasion would win, and they would take over the Jewish land, or at least not lose their own. But that's not what happened. But it's a fait accompli, since they are in the territory of Israel, so they're there. But it's not simply that they're there. Israel self-defines as a democracy, and so any Arab who by the time the war was over wasn't kicked out, all the rest of it, is now you're a full citizen with equal rights in Israel, full citizenship right. So here is Israel's dilemma. On the one hand, Israel defines itself, and they did really, as a liberal democracy. I mean, they meant it. But as a democracy presupposes that all the citizens in the country are committed to the legitimacy in the country, they just differ about what's best for the country. True? You have to understand how these terms are bandied about. Democracy and these other terms sound great, but it presupposes certain things. England is a democracy because everybody's English, and therefore they figure, we can have an argument over how to run England. America, the United States democracy. There are legitimate debates over Obamacare. There really are. There are legitimate debates over whether the government should fund this or not fund it. You could be a Democrat, you could be a Republican. I'll go even farther. You can be a left-wing Democrat, you can be a right-wing Republican. That's fine, because everybody had the same basic assumptions, and they buy into the same basic values. It's just a disagreement over what's the best future for the country, meaning what's the best future for all of us. That's fine. But if you have a situation in which one group doesn't even recognize or want that country to exist, then what's the idea of democracy? You get it? It doesn't work. In Israel's case, the Arabs understandably view themselves as a conquered people. It's obvious they would prefer the destruction of Israel and its replacement with an Arab state. After all, let's be honest, can they sing Hatikva? Kolo balevo nefesh Yehudi homi. I mean, what does that mean to somebody? Okay? Moreover, a Jewish state, a Zionist state, is by definition, and listen to this closely, a state that discriminates in favor of Jews. Perhaps not in law, but certainly in allocation of resources, including, crucially, land and other items like that. Israel has, for the last 60-some years, I mean, they talk about it, they don't talk about it, they've done it legally or illegally, or I won't say illegally, but it's through legal tricks and shticks. They've done a situation in which the overwhelming majority of the resources and the positions are going to the Jews because that's what they set the state up for, right? They spend all the money on bringing in, like I showed you last time, 500,000 here, another 1,000,000 there, to set up. Listen, let's be honest. They spend a fortune of money even today, whether they want to or not, on all the yeshivas and things of this. It's all strictly Jewish. And the Arabs have always gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to the allocation of resources. When it comes to land, people probably don't know this. Well, Israelis know this. There was a lot of land left over that had been abandoned by Arabs. I won't say abandoned. Suppose the Jews kicked them out of a village or a town or an area. So who does the karka belong to? You understand? And the absolute truth is that Israel took it. There's all kind of, they set up a system called the custodian of absentee property. And they, like I say, they wrote laws to make it all legal and all the rest of it. But if you're an Arab, they say, they took my land away. And they just stole it. And there are actually quite a number of cases of Arabs living in Israel who were kicked out of their village over here, said, go live over there, and then Israel took this village and set up a kibbutz or something like that there. So these are not pretty pictures if you're looking for strictly point of view American typical democracy. What are the words the JNF? What does that mean? The Jewish National Fund. How's the Arab supposed to feel? You take his land away or something, I guess, for something called the Jewish National Fund. Now, I'm Jewish. I understand what it means. But he also understands what it means. Am I entitled to expect that this guy who's an Arab is going to be happy with this situation or feel anything other than the bitterest resentment? These are the hard facts of trying to create a country in an ethnic cauldron and in the middle of a war. And, when it's one side over the other. And let's be honest, Israel said like this, the Arabs are no better. If it was up to them, they'd take all of our land and give nothing. And so it's that kind of environment, but it's a rough, tough kind of environment. I will tell you something else. If you notice, there's still a Jewish agency, isn't there, a Sachnut? That a World Zionist organization, they call it. Why? After all, it's redundant once the State of Israel came into being. And some people, like Abihil Silver and the others, said, now that Israel become a state, the Jewish agency should go out of business. It'll be one of those rare cases where a bureaucracy says we're done. And all the functions should now go to where they properly belong, in a well-organized society, to the government of Israel. Why should the Jewish agency, the Sachnut, run the Aliyah, the Klita, the Shikun, and all kind of other things like this? Israel has, it's not, somebody says because they want to give out jobs. The same number of extra jobs you could give on the government payroll. Yes. That's not the reason. I'll tell you, that's not the reason. The reason is as follows. A government, especially the way Israel set up a government, cannot in law discriminate against any of its citizens. But the Jewish National Fund can do so. And the Sachnut can do so. You understand? If I want to have a policy as the head of Israel in which I want to reward, I'm just making this up, I want to reward families for having babies. If I pass a law like that, I got to give everybody that same money, even if they're Arabs. On the other hand, if I say like this, I'm giving money to the Jewish agency, and the Jewish agency will have a special project in which they reward people for having babies. There's a different thing. You think? If the government says we're allotting land and on the basis of all the people live in the Galilee, well, guess what? Everybody in the Galilee got to get a piece of it. If the Jewish National Fund is doing so, the Keren Kayemet L'Israel, and they want to do and the Keren, what's the other one called? The Keren Kayemet. The Keren HaYesod, that's right. The Keren HaYesod wants to build something. That's a different story. So I understand. Guess what? The Arabs understand it too. You see? And then after a while, they say, is Israel a democracy? Is a bluff. You see? And you do get it, right? So I'm just trying to show you that the existential basic circumstances out there are one in which it's not calculated to make the Arabs very satisfied with the status quo. Now, this is not a talk I would give in a mixed audience, right? but it is a talk I would give. But I think everyone who's here tonight wants to have an insight in what's really going on, even if you don't go out and spread it everywhere else. The Ben-Gurion sees. I mean, Ben-Gurion was totally aware of this. Like everybody in his generation, he was totally skeptical about the Israeli Arabs ever really being loyal to Israel. Okay? Ben-Gurion came in 1906 to Palestine. He's from the generation. I don't say he's wrong, by the way. I don't say he's wrong at all. But I'm just telling you that he and the people like him, they said, listen, the Arabs are here. They weren't kicked out. Whatever, this, that, and the other. I said, Shangdo. All right, a fait accompli. What are we going to do about it? It's a problem we have to live with. Don't ever believe that the Arabs will do the Hatikva and mean it. Don't ever believe that you can put them in the army and they'll mean it or anything like that. Don't ever believe anything other than they'll always be ready at any moment for the next 10,000 years to rise up and stab you in the back if you close your eyes for a second. This is just this is the way it is, and I accept this. You see? He recognizes, he recognizes in these Arabs a large and possibly existential threat to Israel on several levels. And yet at the same time, he also wants Israel to be a democratic state for all of its citizens. How do you do that? There is, for example, the infiltrator problem that I spoke about. I don't know if Aryeh Gross is here tonight, but he was in the army. I was just speaking the other day. He was in the army in the 1960s before the Six-Day War. He just telling me every night they had to set up an ambush for Mistananim, for Arabs crossing over the border. That's in 1965, 1966, not in 1948. This entire area, as I said before, the borders are particularly here. Are all full of Arab villages. Some people make trips to Israel. And when you do, you drive north. And when you drive north, if you ever go, I'm talking about the tourists. When you drive north, they first tell you, oh, here is a Kfar Qasim, here's Faham. You look on the right, here's this Arab town, here's another town. Well, guess what? What's right beyond it? Today, thank God, Jordan border is not there. But back in 48 to 67, it was the Jordanian border. And so you drove by, and in Israel proper, I repeat, in Israel, on the Israeli side of the border, is another Arab village, another Arab village, another Arab village. So if you're worried about people crossing over, where are they going to cross over? They're going to cross on the border. Where are they going to come to? To another Arab village. What are the Arab villages going to do? They're going to help them to come in. Why not? I'm sure the Arabs look at it like the Underground Railroad in Uncle Tom's Cabin. You see? And so the presence, the heavy presence of Arab population precisely in the border lines tremendously intensifies or aggravates the security problem for the state of Israel, whose objective is to keep out as many as they possibly can. So what are you going to do about that? Second of all, there's always the problem, and we face this today, but there's always the problem day one, of a potential political independence movement away from Israel. What's to stop all the Arabs from getting together and set up a party called the Party for Arab Independence and do like Thomas Jefferson, when in the course of events it becomes necessary for two nations to dissolve the bonds that hold them. We hold these truths to be self-evident, and we don't want to be part of Israel. Right? And they'll go to the United Nations and they'll do this and that and the other. And Ben-Gurion is totally aware of all this possibility already in 1949. These two guys are in the Israeli, maybe you follow politics a little, they're two Arab parliamentarians in the Knesset today, democratically elected. That's what they're doing all the time. You know, used to run to Arafat, they run now to other things, they'll jump on the boat, you know, that Turkey sent over, they'll go in, they'll do anything they can precisely to conduct a political campaign to delegitimate Israel and to try to make the argument that the Arabs in Israel should be separate, independent state and hook up with the other Palestinians. And I also notice, even though they are Israeli citizens, they have the best of both worlds. You can't touch me when you come as Israeli citizen. I'm a Chaver Knesset, but I'm really a member of the Palestinian people. Ben-Gurion was worried about this long ago. And by the way, what is the solution to this problem today? Nobody knows. We don't have a solution. And so Ben-Gurion, therefore, at that time, he played hardball, and he said that the martial law that understandably began during the War of Independence will be extended indefinitely. So when the Tzahal came in, like you saw before, occupying Nazareth and other towns, it was the middle of a war, and so it was under the control of the army. That means there's a military governor, right, Mshal Tzva'i, and as is true in any war-type situation, in the military government, it's regulations, and so there is a mayor of Nazareth and a mayor of Facham and this town and that town, but above the mayor is an army officer, and he's the one that everything has to be run by. So Ben-Gurion said, I guess the war's over, but what they call the Minhal HaTzva'i is not over. The military administration is not over. And how long is it going on? Till the peace treaty or till someday. Right now we're going to keep it on there. And what that therefore means is that all the Israeli Arabs, all of them, were under what they call martial law, or as they call in Israel, military administration. And that remained for 20 years, 19 years. And so we're talking about a regime of control, suppression, and repression. I mean, let's say, Ben-Gurion was not playing any games over here. And Israel will set up an entire apparatus to run this. And so when you think of Israel in 48, 52, and even the years after that, and to some degree even today, but much, much, much less, but certainly in the first 20, 30 years of Israel, without any question, you understand that the average Israeli said like this: I never go to Nazareth, these places, or Nazareth is not bad, but I know some of these towns, but the army's in control. You understand? Somebody's in control, they can't move to my neighborhood. You see? At the beginning of the state, this guy, Bachar Shitrit, who was a Sephardi and who was a police official under the British, so he was a Sephardi born in Israel, so he had a lot of friends. He spoke Arabic and things like that. So he set up, and they did set up for a little while a ministry for what they call minority affairs, miutim, for minority affairs. And this is supposed to be to handle the Arab affairs. But then, as happens with people who have bureaucracies, he starts fighting for the Arabs. And Ben-Gurion says, I guess, what do I need this for? You see? And so they abolish this Misrad HaMiyutim, this Ministry of the Minority Affairs, and instead, there is no single ministry for the Arabs to go and appeal to have to take up their cause in the government. Quite the opposite. They set up a combination of the Shin Bet. This is how it was founded. The Shabak, the Sherut B'Tuchin Klali. That's what you call the internal security. Well, my friends, what does the term internal security mean? Well, I know it means many things, right? But one of the things it means is you want the internal security from the Arabs. But I'm not finished. The army, the police, Remember, the police in Israel is not like America. It's not the Baltimore police, the New York police. Here in this country, we have a tradition of local independent police departments. The Baltimore Police Department has nothing formally to do, even with the police department of Baltimore County. Sometimes they don't have anything to do with Baltimore City. But since it's the NWCP tonight, I'm not going to say anything. But in Israel, like in some European countries, it's a national police. Do you understand what I'm saying? The Israeli government owns and controls all the police from the top down. There's a general or an official in charge. There's a minister, and under him a professional head of the entire police department of the country. And the only thing is, they say, this group should be in Yerushalayim, and you will be our guy to run the thing in Yerushalayim. You'll be the one in Tel Aviv. But it's nationally run. The reason I say that is, and this is one of the reasons Israel has always kept everything centralized, because if you do it at the local level, you have the Arabs running the Arab police. And who are they going to trust? So if we want something from top down. This, by the way, if you want to talk about dirty secrets, is why Israel has always retained, what they call a proportional representation system. You have all these political parties. People say, oh, Israel has all the different 10, 20 parties. It's all a mishigas. Why don't they have like America, like England? You have two parties, basically, and have greater stability for the government. Ben-Gurion, although he never said it, he didn't want to go there because then you have to divide everything up into electoral districts. Once you divide electoral districts, then who's the one from Nazareth? And then, you understand what I'm saying? And then you have a nationalist movement over there. He preferred it be that the whole country votes at one time, and you just get, votes that way. Oh my goodness. You also have an office of special advisor to the Prime Minister on Arab Affairs. There's a long line of these guys, Amnon Lin and Ezra Donin and people like that, in which they're Ben-Gurion's personal staff, and these guys get together as a particular apparatus of control and of repression, to be perfectly honest. What's the best way of handling the Arabs? That's the way they look at it, and I don't blame them. I understand how they're thinking, but this was the reality that you had in Israel for a long, long time, and you still kind of do. Right? It's a different world today, of course. It is. And there's almost 2 million Israeli Arabs. I repeat, almost 2 million Israeli Arabs, not 2 million, or 1.5 million, 1.6 million. It's a whole lot, and it's a different world. But to some degree, this still exists. The Shin Bet is still there. And God help us if they're not there. That's the problem. Esther, some of you will remember, was very famous as Israel's spy master. In the first years that I'm talking about, he wasn't in charge of what they called the Mossad. He was in charge of the Shin Bet. And that's how he made his reputation. They set up an entire, shall I say, system to control the Arabs. That's not all he did, but that's a major part of it. And what are we talking about over here? We're talking about the establishment of what they call in Israel, euphemistically, the Gormei HaBitachon. Right? When they call the Gormei HaBitachon, the security factors as they translate it, they mean this whole apparatus that I just described. The army, the police, the special advisor group from the central government, Prime Minister's office, and the Shirut Bitachon Klali, the Shin Bet, and all together, they're the people in charge of the Bitachon. In this case, we're talking about internal security to protect the Jews from the Arabs. That's the way they see it. How do you do this? There are time-honored ways of doing this. Israel didn't invent it. The Romans before that, but already existed. And this is just the way you do it. First of all, you do divide and conquer. That's how it goes. This is whatever the population is, you divide and conquer. And the way you do that is through networks of informers. I'm not in the business, but it ain't that hard, I'm told. You just make sure Israel the designers had learned how to do this back in the 1920s. When they first set this system up. But you would hire, get on the payroll somebody in every town. No, 2 people in every town. If possible, 10 people in every town. Why not have 40 people? I'm serious. And then everybody's watching everybody. They've been informing on everybody. And you just have a group that's set up there to analyze all the Lashon Hara, and you can figure out which direction. Well, I know it sounds funny, but it isn't. A major tool of Israel, since before Israel was a state, this guy Ezra Donin set this up back in the 1920s, was to do the following. In every Arab community, it was famous. It's not unknown in Jewish communities either, unfortunately. In every Arab community, there was always a blood feud or a big feud going on between one or two different factions and different chamulot, different mishpachot, and things of this nature. Once you have that kind of situation, if you know how to manipulate it, then you say, okay, there's faction A and faction B. This one I'll make the mayor, this one I'll make the deputy mayor. Right? Use the Lashon Hara, use it. This is as old as they do. The United States does it in Afghanistan, Iraq if they're able to. The Afghanistans does it someone else if they're able to. The Russians have been great experts at this forever. The Hungarians, the Poles, this, that, and the other. Believe me, the Syrian government has tried to do this. And this is the way. It's not pretty. It's the way it goes. A major element of using the lashon hara, all the rest of it, is the intelligent use of the carrot and the stick. Right? If I see that you're more demonstrably pro-State of Israel, you get a couple of more carrots. You see? You want your kid to get accepted into the university or the high school or something like this. This one, yes. If this one is more anti-Israel and goes on with some kind of attitude, you can tell what they really think, then I won't give you the carrot. You understand? Then your kid won't get into this, or you won't get this job. After all, the government, every village and every town has a little government over there right off the bat. It's somebody's the paymaster and the postmaster and the dog catcher, and these are government jobs, aren't they? And the mayor and the muhtar, as they call it, and the deputy mayor. Who is it that gets these positions? The answer is the Shin Bet will decide. On what basis will the Shin Bet decide? Right? What's good for Israel? This is how it's done. You understand? The more restrictive the military administration was, the wider the available carrots were for infiltrators. So, for example, one of the things that's set up with the military government, already in the 48 war, but they keep it on for 20 years, is what they call a pass system. You can't leave town without a special permit. So if you live in a little town of whatever, a little village, you can't go to Haifa even if you need a doctor's appointment. Now, no, wait a minute. If you go to the military office in your town, you can get one. But you get what I'm saying. But you can get one, so we'll give you one if you have a good record. That's all. In other words, by restricting everything formally and then making it open to a lot of little permits, you create a control system, right? If you're not causing any trouble, you will have no problem getting the permit. Listen, some people are on health plans in America where you got to do that with the doctors anyway. Isn't that true? What am I thinking of? Whatever they call those systems? It's like that. You want to get a driver's license? No problem. If. You see? You don't play ball with us, we'll have a hard time getting a driver's license. You want a library card? I'm telling you, and it goes down to total lengths. All designed to encourage the right kind of behavior, or to be more honest, the avoidance of the wrong kind of behavior. Because if I hear you're hooking up with the PLO, if I hear you're hiding infiltrators, if I hear you're smuggling over the border, if I hear you might be suspected in killing some Jew, if I hear you're spreading all kind of things, trying to turn every wedding, as some of these guys want to do, into some kind of a nationalist demonstration, why should I give you a permit to go to the doctor? Right? Or your child. Why should I do this? Why should I do that? That's how the game was played. As I said before, you had a custodian of absentee property, and so let's put it this way: by the time the 49 war is over, so a lot of Arabs find themselves in the following situation. You look at this crazy border I keep coming back to. Well, you remember the picture. A lot of times, the way they drew the lines for military reasons and political, the Jews, the Israelis and the Jordanians, was the Arab town is on this side and the land is on the other side in Jordan. Or vice versa. Well, if it's vice versa, that's their problem. But if the Arab town is in Israel, then it's Israel's problem. So here's a bunch of Arab peasants who are cut off from their land. So what do? Oh, you want to lease some land? It's not a problem if you get a permit. Do you get what I'm saying? If you want a permit? Let's check your record. Let me see your file, your tick. Are you down as a troublemaker? Then forget it. If you're down as a good citizen, as we say, it's not a problem. Then you can lease the land. And so land, jobs, access to health benefits, economic things. Imagine when Israel starts introducing electricity. Oh, you want to get running water? It's not a problem. You want to be hooked up to the electric grid? You watch a television, a radio? It's not a problem. Let's check your record. And you get what I'm saying. Israel had television 1,000 years ago. What are you talking about? Yeah, okay.
Anyway, what I was trying, I'd like to just add, the truth of
Speak up. Nobody can hear you.
the truth of the way I remember it from my childhood also.
Yeah, I'm speaking to an Israeli. That's it.
Water system.
Yeah.
Roads are just atrocious. They got all those systems really, really late. They only came to them when there were like elections or something.
That's right.
They needed to show.
She's talking about providing a road through the town, or water, or bringing in running water, things like this. Yeah.
when you go to one of those villages, even the big villages, you'd be floored because there are no walls. I mean, people build houses willy-nilly.
Yeah.
Remember, they need sanitation, and
Yes.
it was very, very.
But I'm talking about, you're talking about over a few years later. In 4852, it's hardly even that. And more importantly, or more importantly for our story, this is the era when they're trying to do pure Zionism. Zionism, it has to do with the earth, with the ground. And therefore Israel is engaged, understandably, in trying to acquire as much land as possible. And when I say as much land as possible, and I don't blame them, because it was a Jew versus Arab thing. And we're talking about the Jewish National Fund, still continued to exist after the State of Israel came into being. And this guy, the famous Weitz, he was a fanatic. I mean, it's in a good way. He was a fanatic in trying to buy as much Arab land that was possible and acquire as much land as possible. And this is why Israel has whatever land it has today. But you can be darn sure the Arabs are trying to buy it back. If you go up in the Galil, I was there last year with Shimmy, and one of the places we were at is where Ben Gurion used to live in the north, and the Jews there were complaining because the Arabs are buying up all the land around here. You see? And so these issues are really old, but if you're an Arab in 4852, the Arabs aren't buying any land. It's the Jews, and like these guys, trying to acquire one way or another through purchase, through other ways, to get a hold of their land. As I say before, the official term was absentee property, but how do you define that? Israel, therefore, is engaged in a policy, an understandable policy, of rewarding its friends and punishing its enemies. It rewards its friends from the pre-state period. There were Arabs like this fellow, who was a Chaver Knesset, a mayor of what do you call it, of Nazareth, and other things like that, Seif al-Din al-Zuwebi. This is a big family. A cousin of his was the prime minister of Syria recently under Assad, until Assad shot him. I'm talking about the older Assad. The younger Assad has also shot people, but this is the older Assad. Or as they say in Syria, we committed suicide on him. But this guy, no, go back. This guy was a friend of the Jews in the 30s. Right? Maybe even in the 20s. I think in the 30s. And so from the Palestinian point of view, he's a bad guy. He helped Jews. He saw they're going to win. And he helped Jews buy land, including his land from his own Hamallah in the Galil, significant lands in the 30s and in the 40s. And as a result, when the 48 war comes around, his side is all kicked out, but Israel lets them back in, because as he was one of our friends, he was on our side, and he's given positions, and he's given land, and not only that, from his whole chalastra, his whole family, they get in a piece of land. In other words, if you're related to this guy, he's sort of like the Godfather. You get it? You come into him, and he can talk to the Israelis, and he can get you something. And the message is sent out there, guys like this will do well, because as I've said before, even here, the first rule of politics, everybody knows, no matter what situation you're talking about in the world is, you reward your friends and punish your enemies. Otherwise, why would anybody want to be your friend? That goes back, as I say, to ancient times. By the way, this guy's granddaughter, or niece, she's in there. She's to Chaver Knesset, and she is poisoned, right? She was on the boat, right? She, in the Turkish boat, Avi, whatever it was called. And she's very proud of it. So you see, I want to tell you something. If you understand Israel, you understand she has to be super duper, because from the Palestinian point of view, she's tainted. She comes from a family of collaborators, so she has to show that she's more Catholic than the Pope, so to speak. But anyway, there you have it. The friendly Arabs, as I said before, get the least the absentee property. The Shin Bet keeps saying over and over again. I didn't bring the book with me, but Professor Hillel Cohn of Haifa University written a really extraordinary book on all this. So it's not pleasant reading, but extraordinary book called The Good Arabs, and he meant how the Shin Bet called the Good Arabs. And he won a Israel Prize, for history and all this sort of thing. And he's one of these new historians, that's trying to tell the bashing truth against Israel. So all the Arabs look good in his book, but nevertheless, he has original documents from the Israeli administration, and they have these debates. How much should we reward our friends? Should we do it on the Shin Bet? Says nobody's going to be your friend unless you make it worth their while. So this is the world of Israel in these years. As for political goals, I told you Israel does not want, let's put it that way, the development of what we call today a Palestinian consciousness or an Arab nationalist consciousness. How do you deal with that? After all, they're Arabs. Why should they be why should they be Zionists? Why should they be pro-Israel? The period I'm talking about, and afterwards, the period of the rise of Arab nationalism, and the expulsion of the colonial powers from the Middle East, and all that sort of thing. So why would you expect the Israeli Arabs to be that way? Well, this is simply a challenge for the Gormei HaBitachon, for the Shin Bet and the army and the police and the others. How do you deal with this? How does Israel prevent this or control it? First of all, very interestingly, they do something which is still the rule until today. You screen all the teachers. Nobody gets to be a teacher in the school, particularly anything beyond first, second grade, unless you get approved by the Israeli security authorities. Because one thing we don't want to do is have somebody who in the classroom is giving the whole government some propaganda. You know and I know that over the border, the Arab textbooks are lethal, aren't they? 1 plus 1. How you kill one Jew, you kill another Jew, how much is that altogether? No, but that really is the way, that, all joking aside, that is typical, standard textbooks in arithmetic and all these other matters in all the Arab countries. So it is what it is. Israel said, we're not going to have that here. And so we're only going to allow either Jews or Arabs that we approve to be the high school teachers and any other teachers, because this is a very dangerous area. This controls the youth in the future. So you can be sure, especially in the early years, my goodness, nobody will get a job if there's even a breath of anything against Israel. I'm not sure exactly how it goes today. Secondly, you do the good old divide and conquer. I've been talking until now in almost like a racist fashion of the Israeli Arabs. But I think we know today that you can't exactly talk Arabs. In every area of the Middle East, you have a mosaic of ethnicities. They're killing each other like crazy in Iraq. They're killing each other like crazy as we speak in Lebanon. They're killing each other, as we know, like crazy in Syria. And they're killing each other, or they're about to, in Egypt even. And you say, but it's all one Arabs, one to the other. That's a very superficial kind of thing that you get from what I call television journalism, the Time magazine journalism, New York Times journalism even. If anyone studies the Middle East closely, not that closely, but somewhat closely, you find, as I say before, that these nation states are inventions. As we're discovering today, when these countries are mitpotzitzim, right? They're just exploding because they don't really represent any kind of a genuine national kind of consciousness, but somebody stuck them together. For example, Syria, which as I'm speaking right now, is in the midst of a bloody civil war, Ken Yerbu, and if they stop, what are they going to do next? If they stop, what are they going to do next? Right? So, wait a second. Who is the civil war between? It's everybody against everybody. It's not 2 groups. It's 10 groups. It's the classic, the Polish firing squad. They all surround each other and shoot, right? The Druze, the Sunni, the Alawite, the Shia, and other groups. I can't, I'm not a specialist even in that. I know more than many, but not as much as the specialists. There's this type of group over here in this part of the country, and the Aleppo types, and the other types, and all the rest of it, and they play for keeps. I don't know if anybody remembers. Back in 1982, the father of Assad, the old man, Hafez al-Assad, was really angry at a town that was with the Muslim Brotherhood, and they killed every single person, man, woman, and child, and dog in the town. Right? And nobody did anything about it, as you know. So the point is, was this an Arab civil war? It wasn't an Arab civil war. It was this ethnic group against that ethnic group. Well, the same thing is true among the Israeli Arabs. Talk to me about the Arabs. No, don't do that. The Shin Bet says, you got Muslims, you got Christians, you got Druze, you got Circassians even, if you know who they are. And some know, I bet you many of you never even heard the word Circassians. And you have Bedouins. Even though you say the Bedouins are Arabs, the Bedouins is a different group. It's a different group. And so, if we know what we're going to do, the Shin Bet says, you treat this group different than this group, you privilege one over the other, this and the other. As you and I know, this didn't develop in the years 49 to 52, it came later, but as you and I know, the Druze get special treatment, right? And they get special treatment and they pay for it. I mean, in other words, it's a two-way, they're okay with it, right? And, they serve in the Israeli army, all the rest of it. Here we find the difference between truth and lies in the Middle East. Such a thing exists, you'll be shocked to hear. Really, the Christian Arabs are scared of the Muslim Arabs. But hold on, Christian Arabs are afraid of Muslim Arabs. They can't say it, or the Muslim Arabs will kill them. Well, anyway, I'm not finished. So, particularly nowadays. So, the Israeli Arabs, who are Christians, going back to the 1920s, had to be super anti-Jewish in order to demonstrate to the Muslim Arabs that these guys are okay. Now, in the long run, as we've seen over the last 80 years, it hasn't helped, because the rise of the intense pan-Muslim kind of feeling has made in such a way that there's just a natural tendency among the Muslims to get rid of anybody there who would pollute the Muslim territory with non-Muslims. They want to introduce into Palestine and to Egypt and these other places a situation identical to what you find in Saudi Arabia, in which they pride themselves back from the 700s, the 600s even, that is all not only Judenrein but Christianrein. It's all only Jews. And by the way, that is a big principle in Islam, you see. Now, that being the case, you don't know what anybody really feels because everybody's always had a mask on. So really, the Christians in Israel should say like this: oh, this is great. It's under Israel. Under Israel, we will not be persecuted by the Arab Muslims. But they're afraid tomorrow or the next day or in 20 years or 40 years, the Muslims will come in because they don't know if Israel is that strong. And therefore, since the Muslims come in, we have to demonstrate that we have a record that we're always on the side of the Muslims. Do you get it? Same thing with the Druze. Many of the young Jews now are saying, gee, maybe we made a mistake. Only because Israel might lose, and then the Arabs will come in and they will be in trouble for doing this sort of thing. Even though, really, if you ask them what they really think when nobody's looking, they say, Israel, stay there forever. And so, because it's the best, for the Druze, they don't have a large enough population to run their own country, and so Israel is the best deal that they will ever get. You understand? But they can't say it. If anybody's ever interviewed, even in the Israeli media, the Druze and the others say, oh, we hate Israel, all the rest of it. Everybody knows what's happening. Listen, the Druze on the Golan Heights have historically, for decades, whenever the media comes there, he says, we are dying for Hafiz al-Assad. We want Bashar al-Assad. Let him come in now, and this, that, and the other. Why'd they say that? Really, they love it under Israel. They will never get it better than they have it now under Israel. But Israel might give back the Golan Heights. It might not be Bibi, it might be Shelley, it might be this one, that one, and they'll give it. If the Golan Heights, if we're on record as having ever said anything good about Israel, they'll come and check this. So you see, as I said before, lies and truth are all cohabiting in a very interesting kind of mixture. If Israel would project the image, and the Shin Bet writes this and they're correct, back in 48 and 49, if Israel would project the image of strong power, and that we're here to stay, and that the Arabs are gone and all the rest of it, hey, then the Arabs would have many of the Arabs would have a very different kind of attitude. But Israel cannot project this because existentially they're always a fragile country in a hostile Middle East, and who knows, ma yavi machar, and this also colors, as I say before, what's happening over there. This guy afterwards, Reuven Shiloach, who was one of the founders of Mossad, he was Ben Gurion's expert on the Middle East, and he was an expert in what I've been describing. He made his business in the 40s before Israel became a state. He's from Meyer, by the way. In Israel, you knew who's who. His name was Reuven Zaslansky. His father was a Maggid Shir in one of the yeshivas of Meyer. But he changed, as many did in his generation, and he became a secular Zionist, and he became a big macher in the Sochnut, and deservedly so. And he is totally aware, as most decisions is, that Iraq is 3 peoples. It's the Sunnis, it's the Shia, the Syria is 10 peoples. Lebanon is 10 peoples. Egypt is this group. He's totally aware of this ethnic mosaic that's out there, and also of the Israeli one as well. And so, he will try to talk to these people, and he'll say, you're Arab Christian and you're favoring Arab nationalism. Are you out of your mind? You understand? You know what it means. But I tell you, he can't win simply because the Arabs are just making their calculations, and they're saying, this is good for today, but what's going to happen tomorrow? And there you have the tension that's just simply built into the system. During the years I'm talking about, the Bedouins and the Circassians and the Druze are treated marginally better than the Arabs. In the years following that, they'll be treated better than the Arabs. And I don't know if you know this, but the Bedouins serve in the Israeli army. Many people don't know that. Yeah, that's right. They're from the scouts on the border and all in the border police and the Druze. Everybody knows about the Druze, but not everybody knows about the Bedouins. But it's a funny system because, again, if you go in the Negev today, what's the number one problem Israel has in Negev? The Bedouins are just taking over the land, and they're just constructing whole settlements and towns without any permit. And what's Israel going to do? They're afraid to mess with them because that'll add another bomb to the situation. And yet they're taking I was driving, as I say, last January, and you go here and there, and the driver was telling us, here's an illegal Bedouin town, here's another illegal Bedouin town. But and I know they're going to be legalized eventually. And so there you have the Israel that really exists and not the one you read about in nice little articles. The goal of the Israeli policy, as I say before, is to inhibit, to retard the development of a certain nationalist consciousness. This means, during the period I'm talking about, preventing local villages which are not self-conscious nationalistically from becoming self-conscious nationalistically. So Israel's goal is keep life simple, rural, rustic, and at the village level. Encourage keeping the local authority in the hands of traditional local notables and notable families who are mainly interested naturally in maintaining the long-existing power structures and power relationships. And so as far as Israel is concerned, they'll go to a little village or something like this, and their attitude is, this village has not really changed. This is true. This village has not really changed in 1,500 years. It's the same families, century after century. And when it was under the Ottoman Empire, they didn't know what was going on out there. It was under the British, they didn't know what was going on out there. So now when it's Israel, they don't know what's going on out there. Just keep doing your own little thing. Don't get involved in Nasser and this and that, and the Mufti and nationalist movements, which have never really been part of your life. We're not bothering you. Israel, the state of Israel shouldn't hurt you. You never had running water, don't have running water. Eventually we'll get you running water, but, just concentrate on life and stay way out of politics. And it works certainly for the older generation, and it works even for the middle-aged generation. Whether it works for the younger generation, it depends. But do you understand what I'm saying? Therefore, who is the Shin Bet going to say should be the mayor of this town? The same family that was the mayor before. You see? And the other family that always had the job of dog catcher, let him keep that job. And the state will give you a little extra money, and get a couple more camels, and get a little bit more land. But it really is true. And the idea is just don't, there's nothing to complain about. And as long as things is like that, then Israel has nothing to worry about from that particular village. You co-opt the local sheikh, the muhtar as they call him, and to prevent the meetings of all the sheikhs and muhtars in Israel from coming together. I mean, that they don't want to. That's not going to happen because they have a pass system that you can't go out of town without permission. So, not that there's even a move to do that, but you're not going to get all the leaders of all the Arab villages to get together. And as long as that doesn't happen, you're not going to have a national movement. You're not going to have an Israeli party that represents a national, kind of movement. So basically, you have, during the period I'm talking about afterwards, two competing dynamics in play, and they're represented by two different schools of thought in the gourmet habitachon, as they call it. One school of thought is like that. The Arab is either at your feet or at your throat. Look how they kissed up to us when we conquered them in 48, 49. They only understand the language of power, of tough administration. They admire strong rule. If you liberalize or fail to brutally suppress manifestations of anti-Israelism, you will invite contempt and non-cooperation. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought says Israel is a progressive democracy. It may be, I'm talking about among the police. Israel is a progressive democracy. It may be necessary to maintain a martial law regime until peace is signed with the Arab states in the Middle East, but it should be as gentle and as liberal as possible. It should be progressive, and it should encourage education, modernization, and heartfelt identification with the State of Israel as that entity which foster the improvement of their lives. That's a nice way of putting it. Ben Gurion, I can tell you, and the Mapai were in favor of the first position of the Iron Fist. The Mapam party was always famous for favoring the second position. You see, they say that shouldn't be so hard the Arabs, trying to make them more progressive, they'll like us if we give them things, and things like this. Ben Gurion and his guys were inhibited from their, or were always scared, let's put it that way, by a fear of exciting world opinion. Because I'm telling you a very interesting story. I'm telling you that the Israelis had a kind of a dictatorship for decades, and they got away with it. And the world didn't really make a big deal out of it. Is that true? You know what they were afraid of? They're afraid of this. Every time Eleanor Roosevelt came to Israel, she always wanted to go to an Arab town too. You see? And Eleanor Roosevelt was a great friend of Israel. And if she says, how are the Arabs being treated? And Ben Gurion say, well, it's a temporary measure, it's a war on, and all the rest of it, but we're trying to help them as much as possible. You see what I'm saying? There's so far you can go and not go too far. Okay? Here she's talking to Jews. She also wants to visit an Arab village. People of this type. I don't have to tell you, Eleanor Roosevelt was a world figure, and what she said mattered. It certainly mattered to Israel. Here's a guy, let's go after him. The famous international socialist leader, the American Norman Thomas, who ran for president a bunch of times and got a lot of Jewish votes. He ran against Roosevelt. You know what I mean? He was the leading American socialist. He was anti-Zionist on principled grounds. And when Israel became a state, he was a big champion to try to bring to public attention the plight of the Israeli Arabs. It just, in those years, as I mentioned last week, it didn't happen. There was no TV, there was no CNN, and his story didn't get out, fortunately for Israel, his story did not get out there. So some knew about it and all the rest of it, but it didn't get any kind of attraction. But Israel, knowing this, says, we can't go in and behave too brutally in some Arab town or whatever, because it'll get them out, and these types of people will then get a chizuk, you see? And I would say, moreover, Ben-Gurion, who was a funny guy in many respects, was committed to democracy, but his definition of democracy was in the sense of voting. I mean, that is who I told you. Yehuda Leib Talmon, the famous Israeli political scientist, wrote a famous book in that time called The Origins of Totalitarian Democracy. And totalitarian democracy means you get to vote, but once you vote, the government does whatever it wants. You see? Whatever you say, whatever you want to say. But no. It's the European model. And to some degree, sometimes the American model. But the European model is that there's a civil service and the bureaucracy that knows what's best. The politicians have a slight say. I repeat, a slight say. And think, for example, about England. They have the permanent, what they call the permanent secretary and the civil service. And you can't really get them to do too much. So the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, they can move a little bit this way, they can move a little bit that way. But if the bureaucracy doesn't want it to happen, they're going to sabotage it along the way. And it happens that way. And that's true around the world. This is the idea of totalitarian democracy. Why don't we go back to Andrew Jackson times? Fire all the civil servants, that's what he used to do, and put in all your guys. You understand? They used to call it the spoil system in America. That's got problems too. In Israel, you had, as I say before, the Mapai party dominated the entire civil service almost. And that being the case, so Ben-Gurion does believe that everybody in Israel, and they did do this, everybody in Israel votes. And so in 1949, 51, and 55, afterwards, everybody votes. Even though there's some shtick like I showed you in the movie last week, but that happens in Baltimore, Maryland, and Chicago, and everywhere else in the world. Yes, I mean, it is what it is. But overall, everybody gets to vote. On the other hand, you can manipulate democracy. And how do you do that? Well, the Shin Bet has as a goal, a vital goal, to prevent the rise of an Arab party in the nationalistic sense. That would be bad news. The Israeli Arab Independence Party, that's all we need. Like you have today, for example. So he wouldn't have that. And at that time, the Mapai regime was strong enough that they could prevent that. And instead, what they ended up doing was they created these lists, Rishimot. They're kind of like Arab parties, but really they're a front for the Mapai. That's what it totally is. You get it? And so the guys who are being, the candidates at the election are the ones picked by Ben-Gurion or by the Shin Bet or something like that. And all the Arab villages, they're encouraged, quote unquote, to vote for these guys. Not all do, but many do. There's a village with they go village to village like you saw in Salah Shabbati. They just do in the Arab sense. There's one or two Mukhtars or people like that have all the influence, and they say, you play ball with us, and we get you running water, or we do this, or that, get your daughter into university, or I don't know, whatever, and get somebody in operation. And that's how deals are cut. And that one or two people bring in the whole Chamulah, and the result is all of a sudden you have they're voting for a party. And so what the Shin Bet does is they organize and they create and they run local Arab lists composed of notables, Chashuv Arabs chosen by the Shin Bet. This guy we saw before, Seifel Dan Zwebi, the next one. No, yeah, him. He was a poster boy for this. He ran on all the Knessets for 20, 30 years, and what he really is, I mean, let's put it this way: he's a front guy for the Mapai. And so, if you're voting for him, you're really voting for Ben-Gurion. And look at the election poster. That's Ben-Gurion in the middle. Can you see him over there? You see that? And here are the happy Arabs, going up the wall of progress, right? And the idea is kidma ufituach, progress and development. And you vote for them, and everything will be, will be hunky dory. And they do it. Let me put it this way: really, they're part of the Mapai. They're docile appendages, as I meant before. These guys vote for whatever Ben-Gurion says. They even vote whenever they're challenged as happens later in the 1950s, the liberals in Israel want to undo the military administration. And the members of these parties vote for the continuation of the military administration because they're told to do so. So this is the opposite of Ahmed Tibi. It's 180 degrees the opposite. You understand? And that's the way it goes. Really, they're part of the Mapai. And it's the dirty little secret that's one of the ways that the Mapai party stays in power. Take a look at it here. Do you notice somewhere along the line it should say Democratic list for Nazareth in the first one? Yeah. So they had small vote then. That's really, they're voting for Ben-Gurion. Notice, if you say the Mapai got 45 now, the Mapai is 46. You see what I'm saying? What does it say the Mapai is up there? You can say 46. So really they have 47. Do you get my point? Right? Or however many there are. You look at the next one, there's something called the Democratic list for Arabs or something like that, right? And they also have, 2 or 3? Add that onto the Mapai. Because that's what it was. And this was the case until 1977. Do you hear? Until Begin. Even Yitzhak Rabin, yes, even Yitzhak Rabin, we dummies just used to read the list and look at all the Israeli parties and the Jewish parties. It was, the Arabs, they're not a part of this sort of thing at all. That's not true. There always were an Arab party or two, which really are a front for the Labour Party or the Mapai or something like this. And why would people in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s vote for them? Sal Shabbati, they cut a deal. There are many Jewish areas in which they did the same thing as we saw, and they cut deals. This is how politics works down till today. What did Bismarck say? Don't look too closely how the laws are made or the sausages. So in America, don't look too closely at elections in Baltimore, Maryland, or Chicago. I should take it back. Baltimore is renowned for its honest elections. So the Mapam party, which is on the outs, not the Mapai party, is highly ambivalent about this. They were much stronger socialists, you see, and they always talk about socialist equality, and the Arabs should get a better deal. On the other hand, the Mapam party is an all-Jewish party with no Arabs allowed to be members. They have what they call an Arab section of the Mapam party. This is the way it went. The Histadrut, which is the National Union for all the workers of Israel, no Arabs until 1959. You understand? That was a big breakthrough. For the first decade, no Arab is allowed to be a member of the Histadrut because it's the Histadrut of the Polei Yehudim or something like that. Polei Israel, but it has some kind of Jewish word in there also. So who comes out in all this as the champion of the Arabs in the first years of Israel and afterwards? The answer is the Communist Party, the Israeli Communist Party. Here's a famous. There you go. There's your slogan from the 54 elections, right? You see who's in the middle: a Jew, an Arab, and all the rest of it. What does the slogan say? I can't even read it, but you can read it, right? Something about how great it's going to be under communism in Israel, and about 1954, 55 elections. Now this is cynical but clever. Why do I say that? Wherever the communists are in any country, naturally what they do is old-fashioned politics, like in the Aristotelian sense. You simply find. The old story. I think my father told me this also. He, back in the 1950s, when William Donald Schaefer was starting out, so he said, they were friends, he says, what should I run on? Because he ran to be a councilman where his father, in the 5th district or something, for the city council, right? And what you do? So my father says, just find out what people don't like and say you're going to fix it. So what is it? Garbage collection. Nobody ever likes garbage collection. So say you're going to fix the garbage collection. He got elected. You understand? Meaning you find what's wrong, those who are dissatisfied with the system, and you say you're going to be on their side. In America, for example, the Communist Party, back from 1920s, was the champion of the blacks. Right? Because they say America doesn't have civil rights, particularly in the South, and therefore we're going to fix it. And they figure they get votes that way. Yeah, then that's basic politics. So if it's the Communist Party in Israel, there's a small element of Jews that will vote for communist. There was, and we'll talk about that, I hope, in the future. There was such an element. But on the other hand, you have all these Arabs. The Arabs are generally not communists, but they surely don't like Ben-Gurion's system. And so how do you express your displeasure of it? There's no Arab parties, I just told you. All the Arab parties are collaborators and sellouts. So the only thing you do is vote for a communist, even though, it's a funny situation. They're not really communists. Ben-Gurion is very ambivalent about the communists. On the one hand, the Communist Party does recognize the legitimacy of Israel. Russia voted for the 1947 resolution. Meyer, I bet you don't know this. One of the signers of the Declaration of Independence in 1948 in May was the representative of the Communist Party, Meyer Wilner. You understand? There's Ben Gurion, there's the Aguda, there's the Mizrahi, there's the General Zionist, there's the Mapam, and all. One of them is the representative of the Israeli Communist Party. It's just interesting. And so Meyer Wilner was forever, for years and years, decades, he was thinking, and he's a real Stalinist communist. If Moscow says jump, he said jump. If they said, he says. That's what it was. And yet, well, what's the end yet? The Communist Party, as I say before, does recognize Israel. And so to Ben Gurion, if the Arabs are voting for the Communist Party, they are voting for a party that recognizes the state of Israel, as opposed to, let's say, a pure Arab nationalist party, such as developed later in the 1950s called the Al-Ard Party, which was to retake the land, which they wanted to put up a list for candidates in the 1959 election, and the Israeli Supreme Court declared them illegal because they refused to recognize the state of Israel. Now, is that democratic or not democratic? That's what I told you before. When you start challenging the very bases of the democratic system, it gets dicey. As was mentioned before, I hope tomorrow morning to do a Civil War tour down to what the heck is the Civil War all about? Because Abraham Lincoln was saying you don't have democracy when it comes to challenging the very Constitution itself. After all, why doesn't the South say, or they did, they said we don't want to be part of the Union. What kind of a dictatorship is this? Right? All the states that seceded in 1861, they were doing it on the basis of American democracy. They said, we don't want to be part of the Union, and they didn't. And in spite of that, Abraham Lincoln said, well, then we will force you by military force to do this, and he did do it. So what's that all about? When you have disagreements over the fundamentals, then democracy becomes a dicey issue. On the other hand, as far as the communists are concerned, they're following the party line. They oppose Zionism. You hear what I'm saying? They recognized Israel, but they opposed Zionism. And they also advocated the 47 borders. You probably don't know this. The official position of the Soviet Union, different the communists, is Israel has the right to be, but at the 47 borders. They have to get back all the stuff they took beyond the 47 borders. They only changed this after the 67 war. That was a big concession. I mean, most of us don't follow the communist stuff. But there's a few weirdos out there that follow the communist stuff. We used to anyway. And a couple of nuts, including me. And after the 67 war, they made a big concession. They said, okay, Israel can keep the 67 borders, but they got to pull out from the West Bank and from the Gaza, you see? And so that was the position of the Communist Party. Plus, as we all know, and I'll discuss hopefully in the future, after 1949, the USSR became increasingly anti-Semitic. And so Ben Gurion really couldn't stand this. And so you have a very tense situation. Moreover, Ben Gurion is totally aware that the Arabs who are voting for a Communist Party are doing so specifically to oppose him. This guy, Tufik Tubi, was for decades, I repeat, a leading member of the parliament, a communist, and oh my goodness, he would bash Ben Gurion and the military administration, all the rest of it, and drive him crazy. And so the result is a struggle commences that lasts for 40 years. Between the military administration and its leftovers on the one hand, and the Communist Party. The reason I say 40 years is today there's basically a Communist Party because communism collapsed. But what was communism replaced by? Worse. Communism replaced by the Balad and these other parties which are super Muslim Brotherhood and Arab nationalists. It's funny for me to say I found something worse than the Communist Party, But this is Israel. Anything can happen. Okay, the military administration, the Shin Bet, tries to combat them by going to Arab villages and saying these are atheists. You see, the Arabs are very religious. These are atheists, and the atheist nature of the communist candidates to discourage pious villagers from voting for them. And indeed, the Arab communists will mostly be Christians. Interesting. You see, in the Knesset, the loyal Arabs will never criticize Ben Gurion and the military administration. But the communists will all the time, like this guy. These are famous names to the Israeli Arabs. To us or not. The Israelis from day one are enraged at the Arab chutzpah. We're letting you into parliament and you're screaming at us? But it's very famous. The Israeli Zionist poem, Alterman, or the famous poem, take a look at that. Who is the communist member who sits in that house all right? A democracy is not always easy. But that's what a democracy is. In other words, if you say you have a chutzpah, you should shut up, then you don't understand the essence of democracy. So we have to take it off this guy. But it's interesting. Ultimately, each Israeli Arab has to decide his relationship to the state. The older and the middle-aged types try their best to get along. They're the leadership element fostered by the Shin Bet and in the first 2 decades of Israel. But the younger generation, by definition, is more restless. Understandably, they will not feel positively towards the regime that keeps them under martial law. But the Shin Bet, aware of this, redoubles its efforts to control the younger generation, which creates a catch-22. The more intense the martial law, the more resentment it breeds. Although liberals and communists criticize the status quo that emerges, the vast majority of the Israeli Jewish public approves of it very much. Because everybody's scared of the Arabs. And keep them out of my sight. They do not know Arabs. They're not interested in knowing them. And they're very suspicious and skeptical about them. What do all the Israelis say, especially those who even today? They smile at us. They say this, but really they're going to slit our throats. And I'm not saying they're wrong. But that's a universal idea out there. And so I don't love what the Shin Bet does, but somebody has to do, that's the idea. Okay? Hence, the situation remains that way all during the Ben-Gurion era. Ben-Gurion and company are able to explain it away to the world as a temporary military necessity until peace comes to the Middle East. It's really a remarkable episode that Israel was able to get away with this. But they were. Israeli propaganda will point out during these years that the Arabs in Israel, in spite of all the negative factors, enjoy a higher standard of life and even a higher standard of political freedom under Israel than they do under Arab regimes. And this is quite true. So, think of the people living in Nasser or King Abdul Saud. By the way, Saudi Arabia will have slavery until 1965, and really they still have it today. They just put in a law there to satisfy the Western opinion. Do you ever hear about this in the news? You hear what I said? I mean, they have slaves. And by the way, what color are the slaves?
White.
No. They're the black slaves. She's watching a movie. No. They get slaves from Africa. It goes on now. I recently read a book by, which I recommend anybody's interested in this subject whatsoever, the autobiography of Bernard Lewis. Just read. He's in his 90s. Not bad if you can write an autobiography in 90s. He's the leading expert in Islam and all that sort of thing, and the Arab world. It was in Princeton for 100 years and all this. He was a classmate of Avi. And I don't know, did I mention this over here? I mentioned in another place that this just caught my mind, that he says that he was in the 1970s or 80s at a conference in Spain, history conference, and he was there with this other guy, Patrick something or other, must have been an Irish or Englishman, who's a big expert on slavery and all that kind of sort of thing. And they had this professor, an American guy, a black guy, who was participating in the conference, and they asked him, why is it a fashion among American blacks to give their kids names like Muslims, Kareem, Abdul, and all these sorts of things? And the guy answered I'm telling you what Bernard Lewis writes, and he said, we don't want to give our children the names of those people who brought us here as slaves. So this Professor Patrick or something says, then why do you want to give them the names of the people who sold them? Right? So I'm just saying, history is kind of selective when it comes that way. So I've just given you a whole litany of what was going wrong in Israel, and it was a bad situation. But, Israel can point out, and the Arabs don't like to admit it, but it's true, that whatever I just told you over here, by and large, if you take away the pride factor, which is not a small thing, and if you take away the self-consciousness factor, which is not a small thing, but if you talk about life in general, they have it higher and better in Israel, even under the bad conditions, than they do living in Egypt and some other place under the good conditions. I'll return. In fact, let me tell you about this. I don't know if any of you saw it yesterday, but you can go online and see it. In the forward online, there's an article by this guy or a girl who was an American student from Brandeis, I think. And he now spent a year or a semester in Jordan, a university there. And there he encountered a whole self-segregated group of Israeli Arabs, so they come from Nazareth and Haifa and places like this, who are pursuing advanced degrees in Jordanian universities. Maybe they can't get Israeli, I don't know what the reason is. They have their own dorm, and nobody socializes with them. They only socialize with themselves because they're so very different than the regular Jordanians or the others that they meet over there. And what's the reason? The others are under such non-freedom. They can't express themselves. If they say a word about the king, the police come and take you away. If you complain about this, that, and the other, you can't say. And as Israelis, they're not used to it. They're used to being able to stand up in front of television and say, "To hell with Israel." Like the Ahmed Tibi and the other guys. Because Israel, to this degree, is no longer under military administration. You can get away with it. Altogether, they just felt there's such a dissonance. Of course, that doesn't take away the fact that they're all violently anti-Israel, and yet you have this kind of dissonance, do you not? There it is. And so in conclusion, Israel treats the Arabs during these years and maybe afterwards the way a diabetic treats diabetes. The problem's not going to go away, so you have to learn how to keep it under control. The problem is the demographic growth of the Israeli Arab population, many of whom by now are anti-Israel, certainly the political leadership. So what is going to be of the future? Here's the map of Israel. Here's the Arab population, and you can see the key by yourself. There are whole areas, particularly up there, where it was 75% the population, 75 and higher is Arabs. There are whole areas where there are no Jews. And then there are other areas where there is various degrees of significant Arab population. This is an existential problem for Israel that they have no answer to. Nobody I know has an answer to it. So what of the future? The roots of it go back to the period I'm talking about. But the military government lasted until 1966. And by that time, Ben-Gurion was out of power. It was under the next guy, Eshkol. And by that time, the democratic consensus in Israel had emerged, just before the 67 war, that this is just too anti-democratic. You understand? And so they eased up on it. But to be perfectly honest, they took away the formal structures, but they keep the informal structures in there. And so you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We would like to have a situation in which Israel is a total, genuine democracy in 150% of the term. But you have a significant portion of the population which says even that they're totally dedicated to the non-recognition of the legitimacy of Israel and the total destruction of the state. How is a state supposed to operate in which when they have an open democratic statement that there's a growing portion of the population that simply wants to undo the state? This is